The Secret. There was an old town built on the two sides of a broad river, and on the bridge which spanned the river and united the two halves of this old town, there stood every day a little boy. He stood always on the upper side, looking to the north. Sometimes he looked beneath, and his eyes fell on the waters driving past him, eddying and curling in the piles below. And sometimes he lifted his eyes to the distant mountains. If any spoke to him, he had but one word for them. "Whence does the river come?" Then some laughed, and some said jestingly, "Whither does it go?" And some shook their heads and said, "The child is mad." They drove him to the school with the others, and he went, but still his thoughts were on the bridge, and thither he returned when the books were shut and the door closed. He grew older, yet no joys of youth, no glories of the sunset or the sunrise, no radiance of the south could win his eyes from the cold white light beyond the frozen mountains. And still on his lips there lay ever the same questions, though silence became a closer friend to him with age. Then, at last, he looked his question only, and one drew near and said, "Seek the bosom of the Snow Maiden. The secret is hers and hers alone." So visions of the Snow Maiden visited him in his dreams, and all the day was dull to him, and the night when he might see her, if but in sleep, became dear. And the mother who bore him watched him with a terrible foreboding, for said she, "My son's soul is lost to me, and his eyes see me not, and his spirit is gone forth, let God say whither." Then, after many months had passed, she missed him from his bed, and she sought for him on the bridge, nor was he there, nor was he anywhere. And bitterly she said, "He is gone, the child of my womb. Nay, not one kiss hath he printed on these lips in token of farewell." And she covered her face. But the neighbors upbraided him for a vagabond. But the mother said, "Good women, my son is no vagabond. It is the charm of the Snow Maiden that hath drawn him from me." Meanwhile he had gone on his way. The river was his companion and his guide, but the mountains were distant, and often the waters lay as if in sleep. Then his heart sank within him, for the cold light which told him of the far-off presence of the Snow Maiden seemed to be withdrawn into the recesses of the sky. And the river mirrored the trees and the fields, and even the habitations of men. Still he held on, and when sleep came and the weariness of despair, then often was he visited by dreams. And the Snow Maiden stood before him and smiled, and he was lost in her beauty. In the morning he would arise after seeing such a vision, free from the stains of travel, unheeding the dangers of the way, and with all fatigue vanished from him. And as he drew nearer and nearer to the mountains, though his body grew weaker, and he was well nigh to death, then the visions which visited him in sleep were more radiant than before. Nay, each one seemed plainer and more evidently true, and he would wake, having tasted the breath of the Snow Maiden, and seen her loveliness in all its glory. Yet one thing was strange to him. Though she smiled on him, she saw him not, for her eyes were always closed. A great passion now woke in his heart, for he said, "If I may not see her eyes, I had liefer die." And he cried now day and night on her name, for he had reached the mountains, and the rocks were hard to his feet, and his weary limbs would scarce bear him forward. Then one night, when the anguish of longing and despair had well nigh slain him, he saw before him a great cavern. He had sunk to the ground in the anguish of his crying, when he was aware of the black cavern before him, and was aware that she, the Snow Maiden, was there. She stood in the entrance, and he dragged himself on his knees to her, and she laid her arms about his neck, and he heard her voice. "Art thou come?" she said. "Art thou come at last, O my love, for whom I have waited so long?" And she drew him to her, and raised him in her snowy arms, and they entered the cave together. But he was like a man in a trance, and he uttered not one word. Then she wooed him with lovely sayings and signs, and he lay in her arms, and the pure snows of her embraces were upon him. But still he spoke not, and his eyes were as the eyes of one who sees not. But at last he lifted his face to hers, and he looked on the Snow Maiden. And her eyes were still closed, and all the agony of his longing came upon him, and he cried, "O my love, if I see not thy eyes, what good shall my life do me? Open thy eyes, my love, open thy eyes, that their light may fill my soul." Then the Snow Maiden opened her eyes, and in that glance he knew all the ecstasy of love, and his soul fainted within him, and the sound of many waters was in his ears. Meanwhile the mother was desolate, but one day she ceased moaning, and said, "Come with me, O good women, this day shall my son return to me." And they went with her, and they came to the bridge. And when they came to the bridge, the mother turned and led them by a steep path down to the water's edge. And lo, it was so. Her son had come back to her. The waters had brought him from the home of the Snow Maiden. She had taken his life, but he knew her secret, and the light of her eyes was in his.